He is about to head for victory as he comes into the final corners here at Silverstone. The crowds are going crazy. Lewis Hamilton wins the British Grand Prix. He takes his 9th win at Silverstone, his first win in nearly 1,000 days in Formula One, his 104th victory ever. Absolutely brilliant.
Get in there, Lewis! You're the man!
Thank you so much, guys. It means a lot. It means a lot to get this one. A big thank you to all the fans here. Love you guys.
And what a sign off for our joint trajectory here on the British Grand Prix. We couldn't wish for anything better.
Hello and welcome to the Undercut Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jesse Billington, and we're back to review the 12th race of the Formula One 2024 season. We're halfway through it, and of course, this was the British Grand Prix, and what a Grand Prix it was. I'm joined this evening by Thiemo Albus-Daly and Ellie-May Taylor. How are you both?
I have had an excellent weekend, and not just for the obvious reason of the British Grand Prix. It was just wall-to-wall good Britishness from Formula 3. Formula 2 spoiled it a little bit, but Formula 1 very much up there. And somehow we even pulled off the football. So, very good weekend.
Very good. Ellie-May?
I'm good, thank you. Went and saw AC/DC. Their music is still very good. I'm not sure we were ever going to get the guitarist Angus Young off at some point. He just ended up having like this 20-minute solo. But I was like, I think he's having too much fun. I'm not sure we'll ever be able to take him back, or be able to get him back off the stage. But bless them, they've got sort of one foot in the grave, but they're doing well.
They're enjoying life. And for once, we've got a guest back, and I'll possibly have to bleep this in the edit, but from Visa CashApp RB, I've got friend of the show and my dear mechanic, Andy Boulay. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction.
Are we allowed to say that as the team? What do you refer to the team as internally? Because obviously Visa CashApp RB is quite a lot. It's almost certainly shortened in the workshop, isn't it?
I mean, in slang sort of terms and internally, we still call ourselves Toro. To many people in the industry, we will always be Toro Rosso. But yeah, if you're from Sky F1 or if you're looking at the FIA official entry list, we are Visa CashApp Racing Bulls F1 team. That's the full name.
The official title. Well, we've called it many things on this podcast, including still sometimes Minardi if we get really bored.
So I can't repeat some of the names that I've called it, but yeah.
We'll assume they are quite fun and fruity. But anyway, we'll dive into some of the news from this weekend before we actually get into the Grand Prix. And of course, the big thing is we've finally got a new driver signing, and Ollie Bearman is heading to Haas. And I've lost track of how long I've been muttering about this one, really. But hurrah! And Ocon is set to follow him. So we'll see what happens. But for the moment, we know at least half of the upcoming Haas lineup. Do we think it's a good move?
Not really surprising, was it? I mean, it's kind of like you say, everyone's known about this for God knows how long, but we can actually say it officially now. And there's not really too much else to say on because we've pretty much discussed it all pretty much when it first came out, unofficially the first time. But it'd be good to see a rookie in F1 next season. We obviously didn't have one this year. And while it's been a foregone conclusion for a while now, it does take the pressure off him in a way in Formula 2, and he can just enjoy the rest of the year as he gets bedded in more with Haas. And I mean, he got the sprint win in Austria weekend before last, so that was a nice little confidence boost for him. But I think, yeah, he's doing all right. He's doing all right. And again, we saw what he's capable of in Saudi Arabia, so all for it.
We know he's a decent wheelman.
I kind of just have the exact same sentiments as Thiemo. It's not really a shock.
Obviously, this is also Ayo Komatsu's first sort of time signing a driver and starting to build a team, but it's looking good now. He's forming part of a resurgent Haas. They obviously had a good weekend, which we'll get to, but things are looking up for the sort of American team at this point, and it looks like they've got things under control. I think we'll say that, touching wood.
It's their first signing where they'll have someone, well, apart from Romain Grosjean, that isn't blonde and blue-eyed.
Yeah, this is very true. Yeah. Yes, an interesting one. Anyway, we'll move from that to another signing, but not on the driver front, which is Enrico Cardile, the Ferrari technical director, who will be leaving the team with immediate effect and is set to move to Aston Martin. Fred Vasseur will oversee the chassis division in the meantime, and optimistically, as a Ferrari fan, this opens up a spot for Adrian Newey, although he isn't likely to make any announcements of his plans until September. I think he's still sort of somewhat tethered by his Red Bull contract until then, before he at least announces things. But if we spot him at the Goodwood Revival in September, we'll be sure to ask and see if we can get a little sneak sort of idea at least.
I think the interesting thing with this is the fact that Vasseur is kind of taking over an interim and is going to be wearing 2 caps in a way, and see how that goes along. And I think that ties back into what we were just talking about with Haas, because Io's been having a bit to do behind the scenes. Instead of not just being team principal, he's been a bit hands-on in some areas as well behind the scenes. So if that's what's helping push them up the field, then hopefully Fred can go, right, these issues we've been having, is this part of this area? And if it is, let me sort that out, because we can't be doing that again. So it's going to be interesting to see how they both are wearing those 2 caps and how that goes forward. And again, what that then looks like when whoever replaces him comes in and takes that job away.
It's going to drag him back to the coalface, and you'll get a chance to go around the departments and sort of go, what's working here, what's not working here, what do you want to change, then sort of move on to the next and sort of start changing some more bits. He's not been afraid of changing Ferrari, as we've seen so far, so this is possibly a sort of really good opportunity for him to dive even deeper in.
I feel like at the minute it's easier for them to look at what's going right.
There is a few bits, certainly at Ferrari, that aren't going right, which is some developments that have brought back porpoising and have rather taken a step backwards when it comes to aerodynamics. But with obviously that sorted, there's an interesting fact that has come out of this weekend's Grand Prix, and it was one that I'd sort of hoped would mention coming out of Austria, but thankfully it stayed alive after this weekend as well, which is Oscar Piastri remains the only driver on the grid with a 100% lap record. He's covered all 731 laps of the season to date, 3,640 kilometers. Second best is Alonso, 726 laps at 99.32%, and Norris on 724 laps or 99.04%, which is.
I didn't mention it in the previews just because it's nice, but for me it's only interesting and impressive when it gets to the end of the season to see if anyone's actually managed it, because it just kind of it does seem a bit obscure. It's kind of interesting, but again, like you say, it could have all gone to crap the last weekend, and it wouldn't really be anything there. I feel like if you could do that over a season, that's a way more impressive thing than you've managed to finish 12 races in a row without anything happening.
But equally, when you look at McLaren getting both drivers up there's not been the reliability that's caused that for Verstappen. There's not been sort of the major issues on track that may have caused it for between teammates, let's say Alpine. They've just had a clean season.
Yeah, I think it will still be better after the entire season, because then you can see from a full season who's been the most reliable. Because I'll be impressed if Oscar gets all the way to the end and does 100% of everything, and I kind of wouldn't be surprised either. It seems like the kind of thing he would do, but then you've got a more interesting thing to look at. Whereas at the moment you're like, yeah, but you don't have all the data. It feels like, so it's just kind of you're jumping ahead of the gun, and that's like it could be impressive. It's good, but it's not there yet.
Well, it is still 12 races. 12 races is quite a lot. You think, that's, like you said, 3,640 kilometers. That's a lot to have, no one crash into you, have full reliability. You don't crash yourself.
That
I feel so sorry for what you two are doing to Piastri in Hungary now. Sadly.
We're setting him up for failure.
I'm going to take him out of my fantasy team just because of you two now, just for this one race. Poor man. Doesn't deserve it. He's getting shafted enough at the moment without you piling on.
It's going to be like that stat that we had in 2022, where it was like Lance Stroll was the last person to DNF in the season.
Yeah, somehow everyone else had DNF'd apart from Lance. You're like, how has he done that? And he's Lance
Quick
Stroll.
enough to be involved in it, I think, because he's treading around the back, probably.
That was also possibly true. However, it seems that most of the F1 grid are heading to the Festival of Speed, but They're scattered across the week. We've got Williams, we know, are attending with Alex Logan, Leah Block, and James Vowles all running up the hill in the FW08 Championship winner, which was Keke Rosberg in 1982. Red Bull are there with a whole host of cars and a whole fleet of drivers. Max Checo, Mark Webber, David Coulthard, Christian Klien, Daniel Ricciardo, Christian Horner will all be running in various RBs from across the years. Max will be back in his 2021 Championship winner, and Yuki Tsunoda is also forming a part of it. He's back in the old Honda from 1964, I want to say it was. So yeah, they've got some interesting bits and pieces gathered together there. Mercedes are celebrating 130 years in motorsports. Ellie-May dug this one up. They've got the W25 from 1934, the 750 kilo Formula racing car. European Grand Prix champion 1935 of Rudolf Caricola. I believe he shares his name with one of the corners at the Nürburgring as well. Comparable to today's F1 title. The W196R 1955, driven by Fangio and Moss, the Drivers' Championship won that year by Fangio. Mercedes-Benz C11 Group C sports car from 1990, which would have been the Schumacher era, I want to say. There'll also be two more recent F1 cars in the paddock, but they haven't said which ones, with ambassadors Klaus Ludwig, three-time DTM champion, Bert Mailander, F1 safety car driver, Karl Veltlinger, 1/3 of the Mercedes-Benz junior team in the Group C World Championships in 1990 before moving to F1, all getting behind the wheel. Aston Martin are going to be there mostly with Alonso showcasing the new Valiant road car. He's been one of the first recipients of the new all-manual transmission, sort of proper driver's car with that stonking V12 at the front. Ferrari are going to be there with a selection of cars, and they have got Ollie Bearman doing some of the demonstration runs, which is rather nice. And then McLaren are celebrating Fittipaldi's 1974 championship with Emo back behind the wheel of his M23. Bruno Senna will drive his uncle's 1991 winning MP46, and it's 50 years since McLaren's first world title, and since they won the 1974 Indy 500, their first there. Johnny Rutherford's M16CD will be on display in their garage. And then lastly, Alpine have got Kushmaini, Jack Doohan and Sophia Flörsch taking to the hill in the Renault E20 F1 car that Kimi Raikkonen took to victory at the 2012 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. And somehow, this is Sophia Flörsch's first time in an F1 car.
Just shows you how stupid that is, that it's taken this long. And also, this is the perfect way to put Doohan and Miney in that F1 team for next year. I know Gasly signed a contract, he can go somewhere else, and we'll get Flörsch in as the reserve driver, and she can do her F2 duties, and maybe they can drag their team off the bottom of whatever scrap heap they're currently on and actually do something for a change.
It's going to be an interesting...
And it starts at Goodwood, where they all impress massively and break all these records going up the hill.
I don't think against the
all prediction time. It happened early this podcast.
I don't think they've got a chance against the McMurtry Spearling. That thing's quicker than an F1 car, which is
that'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Well, you've got to remember the likes of Don and Justin Law in their Group C Jaguars. They've built those things to be almost as quick as Grand Prix cars. They are going to be a shoo-in for that record up the hill.
We didn't invite you on for your logic to dispel me with. We wanted your optimism and your hope, please, Andy.
Don't shoot down Thiemo's weird Alpine plans.
Thinking about Goodwood, thinking about the lineup, the amount of people they're putting in each car, it's unusual to have that many drivers demoing a single car or groups of cars over the weekend. For example, Williams putting 4 or 5 different people in the car up the hill. That's unusual. Normally, it's sort of one car, one driver that will hold those duties for the weekend. So it's an interesting approach, whether or not it's purely publicity driven or they maybe want to see a demo or some pace. I don't know if that's the ideal place to prove it, given that it's more of a show than a testing day. But it certainly will make for an interesting weekend.
I only care about the people that turn up on a Friday. Which is not a lot of them.
You're missing it on the Thursday night when no one's there.
It's a hell of a lot more fun on the Thursday, especially if the weather starts to get wild. And then you sort of get into Friday when it gets wilder, and then all of a sudden they go, Saturday, we're not doing it. You're like, ah. Anyway, Goodwood Festival Speed out the way. We ought to quickly mention the F1 trailer as well, which was of course released across the weekend, inspiringly named F1. What do we think?
I haven't seen it.
you haven't.
somehow not seen it, and it's baffling. Don't bother trying to figure out why, Jesse. Smarter men than you have tried, and they haven't got anywhere. But you can definitely tell it was directed by the same guy who did Top Gun Maverick. I mean, if you didn't know that beforehand, if you were watching that now, you're like, yeah, no, this is the same thing. And I think it should be a lot of fun. It's definitely going to be a popcorn film, and it looks like it's going to be enjoyable. You're not there for any other reason than entertainment. And I think from the little bit we've got, yeah, that'd be fun.
I think it'll be good as far as films go, and you need to take off your sort of nerd spectacles when you watch it and look at it at face value. It's going to be a fun film. It'll be about Formula One. The only problem is it's sort of got some boots to fill in terms of racing films that we've had over the years. You've obviously got the likes of Grand Prix, Le Mans, Rush, and then the Senna documentary, if you want to look at something like that. If you're going to go into it with rose-tinted glasses and think that it's going to be a historically accurate, perfect representation of F1 today, then you are going to be disappointed. But like you say, if you look at it with the same eyes that you would view Top Gun, look at it as a bit of fun, have a bit of a laugh watching it, and just enjoy it for what it is. I think it could be quite good. And from
I think it's definitely going to be one of those films where you kind of punch the air watching it at certain moments because you've gotten way too invested way too quickly, but you're not mad at yourself for doing that, and you're just like, yeah, it's maybe a little kind of tenuous in places, but you couldn't care less about it because you're just having such a fun time with it, and you're like, why not? You know, it's just it'll look good. I think that's the thing with the way they're filming it and the cinematography and everything, and probably the music. It'll make up for any of that side of things where you, like you say, if you've got your nerd hat on and you're trying to point out all these irregularities and whatnot, you're like, I don't care. I'm having a nice time.
Exactly. You need to look at it that way, and you will thoroughly enjoy it.
You're going to need to sort of put aside my sort of slight concerns.
So it means you're going to hate it, Jesse.
Yes. Yeah, because they've said they're sort of the plot is bringing back a driver from the 90s to coach a new guy, which is a little bit far-fetched because you wouldn't bring back Martin Brundle or Damon Hill, stick them in a modern F1 car and expect them to go that quickly. So I think obviously there's going to be a bit of suspension of disbelief, but the way it's been filmed, the fact that they've sort of for a few runs here and there have had sort of 4K cameras stuck on the side of actual F1 cars. And there is one shot, I think you see the cars heading up through Radion. You can actually match it to which car was doing that. And it was Pierre Gasly's Alpine a few years back doing that run up the hill. And you're sort of like, oh, that's good. And then they've just digitally retouched it. So it looks like the Apex GP car. So there's some interesting bits to it. And I'm genuinely excited to watch it and then watch it again with my more skeptical hat on. So we'll see.
I'll have to look at it as in trying to.
You have to watch a trailer.
You need to watch I think you should watch the. Thiemo hit the nail on the head. Look at it the same way you would look at something like Top Gun. That's the best way to take it. And I'm probably the only person I know I can think of right now who is more of a nerd about certain technical stuff than Jesse. So I'm going to have to refrain myself pointing out all of the issues with it, but I'm going into it with an open mind. When it does,
what I'll say to that is, look, Jesse, it can be done. He can just enjoy himself. So maybe listen to Andy a bit more.
But I got annoyed at Ferrari.
Yeah, but that was funny in places for all the wrong reasons.
I got annoyed at that.
Well, I don't think this will be that.
Done that better.
That was meant to be more of a serious film, I feel like, though, when they dropped the ball in certain areas, where I think this one, they know that they're trying to find that balance. It doesn't feel like they're going for it. They're not doing a historical documentary on someone. They're not taking a snapshot of history. They're just going, here's Top Gun with F1 cars.
Which, yeah, hopefully I'll just be able to look at it like that and not have like the nerd side of it like I do with you guys as well.
We'll
Stick with Andy and I. Ignore Jesse.
We'll wait and see. Anyway, back in the land of reality, we of course had some interesting FP1 drives from 4 drivers up and down the field. We had Isaac Hadjar sitting in for Sergio Perez. We had Franco Colapinto replacing Logan Sargent, Ollie Bearman in for Magnussen, and Jack Dillon in for Gasly at Alpine. So did anyone really get a chance to watch FP1 or take any sort of little notes? Because I've flung together a few bits of what really caught my eye, but overall...
I did watch FP1, and it's always interesting to watch. It's like Texas last year. It was kind of fun to see who was going to do what there, because you've had so many of them out there. And like I was kind of saying before with Bearman, he's just getting the grips with the team. He's betting himself in there. Dillon's doing what he needs to do essentially to show that he'd be a good replacement for Ocon. I think I can obviously see who else would be up for that seat, but it'd be criminal if it's not doing for me because the guy he deserves a shot at the very least. And I think Colapinto is unlikely to get that seat next year, but he's just reminding everyone he's there. He did what he needed to do there. And depending on who they get next year and for how long, he could still be in that for 26. He's still only in his first season F2 this year, so if he goes back next year, it's not a big deal. And as for Hadjar, it's probably the closest he's going to get to an F1 seat anytime soon. So regardless of what he was doing, it's not going to help him. They're having enough trouble with their seats as it is with the backlog of drivers there. So I think he's also someone that just needs to calm down a good bit anyway before he gets anywhere near F1 machinery and dealing with that. He's kind of a little bit reminiscent of Yuki in that sense of we don't want to stick a hot head in that soon. And it's nice that we've seen Yuki calm down a bit more over recent years, but we don't want to start off like that. And I think he seems a bit of a more extreme version than that. So I think he's just going to be happy he got the chance at the moment. And I wonder if he wasn't doing as well as he was in F2, if they'd have stuck one of their other rookies instead.
I was going to say with Franco Colapinto, it's an interesting one because he was relatively on the pace with Albon. I think they were doing a little bit of testing on that car across the day. So it was an interesting insight, especially given he's just moved up to F2. So he's sort of relatively new to getting into cars of that caliber and quite close. And equally, there's sort of growing swirling rumor that maybe they are going to go for Antonelli straight into Mercedes, which does rather keep that Williams seat open, a seat that they have also hinted at maybe opening up later this year, which is quite a bold statement. But given that there's been sort of advanced talks between Prema and Logan Sargent for heading over to IndyCar, they might be looking at trying to accelerate his move over there anyway. So if you're Colapinto, you could be sort of almost doing an Antonelli and sort of bounding your way through the feeder series and finding yourself in an F1 car, but at least you'll be at Williams where the spotlight won't be on you quite so stringently and you might get away with a little more. Everyone else, I think Thiemo is sort of fairly on the nose with when it came to sort of explaining things. Bearman is just getting set into the car. Hadjar, I think Red Bull are just using him because they need to do these tests. And Doohan is again sort of basically proving his mettle and equally confirming his sim setups as well. The amount of sim work he does for Alpine, it's worthwhile him getting the seat time to sort of know what's going on. He's got a few more FP1 sessions with the team later just to confirm they're heading in the right direction technically, whether or not it's the advances are actually correct, but if the sim is telling them the right thing, he's doing his job. With FP1 out of the way then, we'll dive into the Grand Prix, and for the first time in 729 days, nearly 2 full years, we've had 2 consecutive races not won by Max Verstappen. The last time was Silverstone, Austria 2022, so it's interesting we've sort of come to those races reversed in order and finally broken that duck, but incredible consistency from Verstappen, something that can't really be said about Perez. Thiemo.
I'll get into Perez in a second, but I wanted to say a fun fact, because if the math is correct, if we started the season in Imola, Verstappen would still be leading the championships, which just kind of shows you the stakes of it. But yeah, Perez,
but what gap would he be leading by?
Does it matter as long as you win?
Yes.
True, but I'd be curious to know as to how close Norris would be at this point.
It wouldn't matter anyway because he wouldn't convert it. Perez, though, yeah, running on the hard tire at the start was kind of his only saving grace there because it probably helped Verstappen at the end of the Grand Prix, but that's essentially all the good you can say about his weekend was that he helped Max, and the rest of it was a bit downhill. Yeah, poor qualifying pretty much turned him into a sacrificial lamb, and it's got some serious question marks there. I mean, I've got a little bit more I want to say about him later, but it ties in with stuff on Minardi, as I'm going to call them. So I'll leave it for that. But Verstappen himself, he was quite impressive in qualifying. Damaged car, still kind of, again, it shows the difference between a championship drive and someone who is in a fast car. You know, you can still do the deed rather, without necessarily having the best equipment available to you. And he showed that. And it was another championship-worthy drive from him in the race itself. He knew it was a marathon, not a sprint. He did everything he needed to where it counted. He breezed past Norris at the end, kind of reminiscent of what Norris did to him at the start, but it actually mattered this time. And he took points away from him in the process, which is good for him. So he's obviously, he said in, was it Spain or Austria or somewhere, that Spain, I think it was, where, you could have let Norris pass. And like, yeah, but I'm not fighting for P2, I'm here to win. Whereas in a circumstance where the win is possible, but not necessarily guaranteed as much as it would be normally, he's still going to be like, well, I'll still fight hard for it. And he was chasing down Hamilton towards the end. But he knows that as long as I beat my nearest rival, I can be happy with P2. And like he said in, what was it, Miami, if P2 is a bad day, I'll take it.
Yeah, he's still extending in this case his gap to the guy behind him overall. So for him, it's still essentially a sort of championship wise, it's a win. But yeah, I think there's some interesting bits. I think Verstappen had a very Verstappen drive. It's easy to sort of sum up his, but I think all the talk again at Red Bull comes back to Perez, and it's where he now lies in the championship.
Yes, I mean, he's now, what, 6th in the Drivers' Championship with Russell only 7 points behind and Hamilton 8. I mean, after Hungary, he could be 8th in the standings, albeit I know he had a poor strategy this weekend, but you can't blame that entirely on where he finished in that race. I'm not sure what else they can do for him. They gave him a 2-year contract to try and ease the pressure off him in case that was sort of hindering his performance, but he's got worse since.
That's exactly what Alice Powell was saying. It's like normally this reassures you, and yet somehow it's made him worse. Like that's not what that's supposed to do.
Yeah, and Gasly was dropped 12 races in for being 6th in the championship, 118 points behind Max, which is less than what Perez has got right now. And this is sort of where I found out I have too much time on my hands, and I went on a sort of a deep dive. And this is an extract from Sky Sports on partially why Gasly was dropped in 2019. And they said Gasly's struggles were particularly acute in Budapest. Whilst Verstappen challenged from victory after taking pole position, Gasly only qualified 6th, 8 tenths adrift of Verstappen, and then finished behind McLaren's Carlos Sainz in the race. I then looked up the position and he had finished the race in 6th. During his time at Red Bull, Gasly finished in the points 9 times out of 12. 2 of them were DNFs. One was at Baku, which was a disqualification as his car had exceeded the maximum allowed fuel mass flow. The other was the German Grand Prix where he crashed into Albon. Perez has also finished in the points 9 times out of 12. 2 of them are also he's DNF'd at. I could finish here, but I decided to be a bit more of a nerd, and I've gone one step further and worked out averages of Verstappen versus Gasly and Verstappen versus Perez. For qualifying this year, Max on average is 1.8, Perez is 8.1. Obviously, that's a difference of 6.3.
Well, you're only looking at GPs because my stats take into account the sprints so far as well, which makes it a little more favourable. Whereas I've got Verstappen on 1.9 and Perez 7.7.
It's 6 tenths difference if you disregard Silverstone. If you include that, it's 1.6 where he didn't get a time in. In 2019, Max was qualifying on average 4.2, Gasly 7.8. So Gasly already has a higher qualifying position, and the gap between them is 3.7 places and a 5 tenths difference. For races, on average this year, Max has been 2nd, Perez is 5.8, which is a 3.8 difference. For 2019, Max was 3.3, Gasly 7.1, which is a 3.8 difference as well, which is the exact same. So really kind of Gasly was doing better apart from race finishes.
You need to remember as well that there are few companies on earth as ruthless as Red Bull. And I'm speaking from first-hand experience. There are caveats in Perez's contract. There are certain conditions which he must abide to, regardless of individual finishing positions in each race, and they pertain to the gap in the championship, his both position-wise and points-wise. Don't quote me on this, and I'm going to sort of take this off the record, but it's something like if he is 100 points behind Max by Belgium or by the summer break, or more than 5 positions behind, then that is an automatic breach of one of the terms of his contract, which would put him in a very vulnerable position in terms of Red Bull axing him.
The reports I've heard as well from other sources also suggest that, so I can sort of take a bit of the pressure off you on that one. But yeah, I've heard from other sources around the grid that it is 100 points and 5 places after the Belgian Grand Prix. So currently he's got a fined 37 points against Verstappen, and pick up his positions in the field at the same time. So it's a no tall order.
Is it awkward that I'm weirdly rooting for Verstappen now? After so long of going dead against.
And you also think it's got to be on merit as well. He can't, it can't just be that Max DNFs and
Perez will want it to be on merit in a certain way, but he'll also think, give me the points any which way I can get them to make this happen.
Yeah. The other thing as well, though, is Perez is just not, regardless of how well he drives relative to the rest of the field, there is no denying that Max Verstappen is an absolute animal behind the wheel of any racing car. So to directly compare him is a tall order in the first place. And I saw firsthand this past weekend Perez's absolute lack of pace relative to his teammate, and in fact relative to the McLarens and the Mercedes as well. For the whole race day on Sunday, I was sat at the exit of Club Corner, and Perez is noticeably later on the throttle, lower on the revs, and more tentative on his exit, which is something I noticed from a sort of technical point of view. I've spent enough time around race cars and watching them go around, but it showed a clear difference in not only pace but also confidence in the car. He could not put his foot down as quickly as everyone else. He's losing confidence in the car. He's losing confidence in his own ability and in his ability against Max. Those issues compounded with the threat of Red Bull's contractual obligations are creating an immense level of pressure, and I wouldn't blame anyone for being in the position he's in. It's just a shame that he happens to be a part of an organisation that is as cutthroat as Red Bull Racing is.
Yeah, I think
Part two for this later, but I don't know if you want to talk about other teams before we get to that point, just so we don't have like a solid mini podcast just on Perez and Red Bull inside the main podcast.
Yeah, I think we'll jump to a bit of that when we get to RB in a bit.
Yeah.
So we'll dive then into Ferrari, the only sort of group here that could really be described as having a rougher weekend than Perez potentially, apart from on one level.
Did I not tell you for months and months and months that Carlos Sainz would be getting the fastest lap of the Grand Prix at the British Grand Prix? Have I not been saying that for so long? Was that an extra cherry on top of the cake for me this weekend after what was an excellent Grand Prix? Yes, it was. I saw him pitting and I thought, oh no, what's happening? And then I realised, wait a minute, he's got quite a gap back to Hulkenberg. Is he doing what I think he's doing? And he did.
Do you want to know when you started predicting Carlos Sainz's fastest lap?
I have a really bad feeling about this. October last year?
Spain last year.
Spain? Oh, dear Lord.
You've been guessing Sainz fastest lap since Spain last year.
That's so much worse than I thought it was.
And it has only just happened. I'm glad I kept that spreadsheet.
Worth it. Because now I am free. That was the thing, though. I was doing so well with that prediction up to that point that I thought this should be quick. And then it turned out I challenged myself a bit. And then it kind of turned into what this has been for Lewis in some ways. It's a much longer slog than I thought this was going to be before I won again. And was it as satisfying as his win? Probably not on the same level, but I can relate in a small way here.
Yeah.
I think I almost cheered as hard as Hamilton's win as I did when Sainz got fastest lap. Happened.
To weight off my shoulders, I'm so happy I don't have to predict him for fastest lap for Budapest now.
I mean, the question is, who are you going to predict? Find out when we do our
I don't know.
Budapest
I've got
preview.
time to think. You've
got a week of it to sort that out.
I can hear things that I've not heard in a long time. I see things that I've not seen for ages that I should maybe like stop signs. I see them now. It's brilliant.
Anyway, I think Ellie-May, you've probably got something to say on Ferrari here. I think.
No, I don't. I literally don't know what to say about them because it was
a classic strategy for Ferrari and McLaren. That's what it was.
Unfortunately, it seems that McLaren rather also picked up their notes from the photocopier, but. Oof. I mean, well, Ferrari and McLaren photocopying things, it's a tricky one to talk about, but I think...
Not go there.
It was Charles' strategy sort of rather compounded his unfortunate qualifying. It set him on the back foot. And I think in the development war, they've now been left behind by the top three. And when you see them against the midfield and they aren't able to really run away with things, the car just isn't underneath them certainly as much as Charles wants it to be. I think certainly the development that's taken them back towards a bit of porpoising and a bit of flow separation has just led to a slightly more turbulent chassis to try and wrangle. Science is a bit more used to that and almost likes that, but for Charles, this just isn't it. And yeah, hopefully
the unfortunate thing was if it had worked as a strategy, they would have looked like geniuses for having called it. It was just the unfortunate thing of it didn't. And
yeah,
it's one of those, again, awkward things where if it was another team, you'd maybe give them a bit more slack for it. But it's Ferrari, and we're used to them doing this kind of thing with strategy and Leclerc, and I'm just like, not again.
Well,
yeah.
Red Bull did the same strategy, pretty much.
Well, yeah, but it was Perez, so nobody really minded.
Yeah, I think
It
hopefully
wasn't going to have any
upgrades.
relevance for him. He was already buggered as it was.
Hopefully, revised upgrades will get them back on form, especially as McLaren is now chasing them down in the constructors, just 7 points behind them. So we're getting an interesting constructors battle stemming from it, but it's coming at the sake of my beloved Scuderia, and I'm not sure how I feel about that.
You had Monaco. You should be happy.
Is it okay to want more than one race in a season or two?
Yeah.
You're a Ferrari fan? Yes.
We had Le Mans as well.
This is true. Yeah, can't ask for more than that.
You get a Charles Leclerc win at Monaco and a torrid season, or you get a great season, but Charles Leclerc DNFs at Monaco.
Tell you what, I'd rather have a 499p Modificata, the sort of customer
You're
version of
greedy
their Le
now.
Mans car. That
You're
would be
greedy.
fun. Andy, have you got anything to put in on Ferrari?
Ferrari's a sore personal subject. I've been
Isn't it for all of us?
Yeah.
I've been a Ferrari fan my entire life. We have a very close relationship to the team in my family, and it's painful to see their current form. And there's a lot of people who sort of ask, why are they not as good as they used to be? The long and short of it is that they are more reliant on a sort of more focused Italian workforce. They don't have as much influence from engineers that are primarily based in the UK in years gone by, and who are more closely associated to the rest of the Formula One grid. Ferrari, it's a funny thing because they are consistently P2, P3, P2, P3 in terms of championship standings in years gone by. Why they can't make that little bit of an extra step up to the top is something that I just think remains a mystery.
I was just going to say, I think sometimes if you look at sort of the ethos of Ferrari, if you go back sort of to the past, they've always really focused hard on the engine side of things, and always thought that you should have a great engine and that will get you through. And I think with F1 nowadays, you can't just rely on a great engine.
Yeah. I'm going to slightly quote Clarkson here a couple of years ago. Does anyone remember on Top Gear when he said that whenever Ferrari were making really good race cars, their road cars were crap?
Yeah.
But the Ferraris that have been released lately are actually quite nice. So maybe there's
little V6 sort of mid-engine number is an absolute worldie of a road car.
Yeah, I would be honest. So maybe focus on the race team a bit more. I don't know. I think something that certainly hurt them is the cost cap. We're seeing evidence of that now. A couple of years after it's been introduced, that Ferrari are dealing with a budget and a set of circumstances that they've previously not been used to. I think there is still some huge adaptability to overcome there. And when they find their footing in the sort of newer age of F1, the more aero-focused, more setup-focused era of F1, that they will come to the fore. We're just not seeing that yet. I would give it another 2 or 3 years, and hopefully we'll see Ferrari back on the top step consistently.
I mean, when you mentioned the cost cap, it's worth remembering that you could almost argue that one of the reasons that potentially Red Bull are starting to not slip back but be caught by others is because they're still sort of under the sort of penalties from breaking cost cap regulations, according to some sources, that is. But I don't know, you might be able to shed a bit more light on that.
I'd get in a little bit of trouble. You've got to remember that I work in tunnel. I talk about that very much. I know exactly what happens behind those doors, and I know exactly how their sort of test session runs and everything. And I'm really sorry I can't tell you guys.
His hands are tied behind his back, so maybe we've struck a little close to a vein with that one. So we'll move on then to Mercedes. And what a weekend.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Mercedes won 2 in qualifying. I was happy enough with that. Well, I wasn't happy enough with that. I was like, if this is all I'm going to get, I'll be happy with it. It was a surprise, but you'll take it. And especially when with Norris's help, they get that British 1-2-3 for the British Grand Prix. You're like, you know what? Much as we love the Grand Prix itself, if that all goes to shit tomorrow, at least we had a nice Saturday. And when was the last time this happened? 1968. So it's worth the wait in that sense. But then you get that Grand Prix off the back of it, and I mean, Channel 4 kept saying this afterwards, like you couldn't have written it better for kind of a fairy tale story. I mean, Toto was saying the same thing as well. And you just think 56 Grand Prix since Lewis Hamilton last won, obviously back in Saudi Arabia in 2021. That Grand Prix, we've all got that seared into our memories quite well there. And then on top of it all, it's like his 104th Grand Prix win, just to extend his own record, kind of shaking his own hand at breaking another record that he had. Having his 9th win at Silverstone, which in itself is again another F1 record at a single circuit. Previously, him and Schumacher shared it on 8. Schumacher having held that in France, Hamilton having that in Hungary. And then you look back and it's only Prost and Senna that come anywhere near either of them with 6 Grand Prix wins each in Brazil, France, and Monaco, respectively. And you just think he's not just kind of a little bit beaten their records now, he's eclipsed those drivers. And it's just insane. And I mean, I know Ellie-May's going to cover other bits before I have one other fun little fact that I want to throw in there just to round things off with. So it just keeps going.
Yeah, I mean, this is the 15th time he stood on the podium here. His 11th consecutive British Grand Prix podium, to 12 if you include the 70th anniversary Grand Prix. He's now the first driver to win an F1 race after competing in more than 300 Grand Prix. This was his 344th, which I thought was kind of nice that it has the number 44 in it. Obviously, it's 150th podium with Mercedes, and his win comes on the 70th anniversary of Mercedes' first ever F1 Grand Prix victory at the French Grand Prix in 1954.
Also 199th
podium. I was going to say 199th
so...
podium overall. And then amusingly, because of Verstappen finishing in P2, because of course he bloody did, it means that Hamilton and Verstappen's 1-2 finish record is now 32, which breaks the record of 31 held by him and Rosberg before then. So it's kind of, even when he's breaking records for Verstappen, they're going, let me help you break one more.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it was, as soon as he was past Norris with the pit stops, it's this whole kind of trying to balance yourself of not absolutely losing your mind, because you think, we've seen this before a few times. We haven't had many opportunities since Saudi Arabia for Hamilton to be in a position to do this. And you just know what F1 can be like in terms of cruelty sometimes. I mean, you just look at Leclerc any time almost in Monaco. That's a perfect example of this. And you think, at what point can I dare to hope a little bit? Because you'll see Verstappen close on Norris and think, well, he's going to get past him, but I'm hoping he does it late enough that it doesn't matter on Lewis. And then he gets past him a little sooner than you would maybe like if you're rooting for Hamilton. And I think, no, that's not what we need here. And I think it was only just after the hanging straight going into Stowe on the very last lap that I thought, okay, maybe now. It's about as close as I'm willing to get ahead of myself here. But yeah, just such a, I mean, 104 Grand Prix wins, you think, oh, how the hell do you remember all of them? How are you going to try and rank them in any way, shape, or form? This one's top 5 at the very least. That's what a way to win. And you think, you come into the season, you see the news about him going to Ferrari, and you think you'd love to get one more race win with him. You're thinking which circuit would be nice for it to happen. You're thinking of Brazil or Texas, somewhere like there where he's got a good following, he enjoys it. And you think, obviously Silverstone, but you're like, that's a bit, it's not far-fetched, but it's hoping too much, which we are famous for doing, and then getting beaten to shit about when reality comes along. And then it happens, and you're like, you know what? If that is his last win with Mercedes, I'm happy with it. It's not a bad one to have as the end of it. And on the flip side, you've got to feel a little bit for Russell. The irony of having a water problem with your car when it's raining at the British Grand Prix is a bit too on the nose. But he didn't do anything wrong. And I was having a think about him. I was thinking, is he now the new Charles Leclerc in terms of not being able to win at his home race? And with that in mind, I'm going to make a prediction that Russell will win the British Grand Prix in 2026, echoing Leclerc as it took him 6 attempts to win the Monaco Grand Prix. So before I talk any more about Mercedes and just make another mini podcast in here, someone else can please take over.
I'm gonna add to your list of records and numbers.
Please do.
So the record attendance for the British Grand Prix with 480,000 people visiting over the weekend. It matches 2023. So an unbelievable weekend for numbers alone, which I think is quite brilliant.
I think it pulled them in on TV streams as well when it came for sort of people watching it as a live event on sort of all the Sky channels.
It's on Channel 4 as well. It's
on
the
Channel
only one
4.
that has to be
streamed,
pre-broadcast live, because we've got a fun law about that. And I just think, and I love that this is the free one that you get. It's like, if this is ever a gateway to get into F1, this is it. This is how you get someone who wouldn't normally watch it to kind of like, what's this all about? Then sit down. This is going to be good.
Yeah, this was a good one for it to be.
It was on a personal level, it was quite nice for us because I took my dad with me on Sunday, and it's the first time my dad has been to a Grand Prix since 1985. So he was absolutely loving it, and I thought, what a good one for him to watch. I'm not even a diehard Hamilton fan, but I have to admit that the atmosphere was electrifying, and what a day for it. I think it was absolutely fantastic, and you could not have written it better.
Well, it's the thing, I think even if you got a Russell or a Norris win, like obviously the crowd would have been satisfied with it, but there was just something about it being Lewis, being at Silverstone, last year. I don't know, it's just like you say, you can't write it. It's just there's so many elements there that you want to put them all together, but you dare not.
Yeah.
Who won in 1985?
British Grand Prix 1985, I can't remember.
Were you even around in 1985?
I was not around in 1985, I promise you right now.
That's why you can't remember.
I want to say it would have been Prost or maybe PK.
It was Prost.
Look at that.
Well, going back to Mercedes themselves, I mean, they were quick in qualifying and at the start of the race too, which seems to have been their Achilles heel this year. They'll be quick in free practice, and the pace seemingly falls away sort of during qualifying, and they usually struggle on the high fuel loads. So hopefully this means now that they have, or they're getting on top of that, and sort of this weekend shows how much work I think the team have really put in to find out where they went wrong and how to fix it. And now it seems to be really paying dividends. And kind of like what you said, I'm not, a diehard Hamilton fan, but it was really nice to see both Mercedes and Hamilton up there. It was like a fairy tale.
The last thing I want to add on that one, just because I've remembered it, is I love the fact that this comes so soon after whoever the butthurt individual on the internet was that sent that email around going, oh, they're mistreating him, they're doing this and that, and he's not being allowed to win. And then he goes and does this, and you're like, you're back in your box.
Yeah, I mean, I really love this resurgent Mercedes. And admittedly, George rather lucked into his win in Austria, but then a second Silver Arrows win in 7 days later shows that this team is rebuilding, and rebuilding fast with a good element of consistency. This isn't just flash in the pan pace from them. The overall speed in qualifying and then again in the race was phenomenal. And when you consider that the McLaren is likely still a faster car, on softs to the end, Lewis made the difference here. Being able to make that tyre just go that bit further proves exactly what he's got to offer behind the wheel. As a fan of F1, purely as a fan of the sport, you have to have been grinning from ear to ear at that point when he was coming round for those final few turns. And they played some solid strategies, and while that final soft stint was a bold one, there's still also the trust in their driver that he can make it work. And people have slated Mercedes for giving up on Lewis. Thiemo, you mentioned it, but they haven't, and this ultimately proves it. And that if they ever had, they would have been daft to. Moreover, they have upgrades coming for Hungary and Belgium. Work on the W15 isn't over yet. This is a team that still has more to give and still knows that it might have a chance to chase down Ferrari in the constructors if Ferrari's luck keeps going the way it seems to be.
I mean, they usually go out well in Hungary anyway. So I'd say watch this space.
Yeah, we'll
This
see
is where
what
I'm having
happens.
your trouble, Jesse, with Ferrari in terms of you want more, but you know you shouldn't because you should be happy with what you've got in a lot of ways. And now I'm like, well, I wasn't expecting this, and now I'm looking at the other Grand Prix left on the calendar and thinking, okay, that's doable, that's doable, that's doable. But also, no, I can't let myself look
Yeah.
like this again. It's happened once already. It's too much. But
Yeah.
for me, the thing, like you say, the Hamilton was the difference maker there, and it's a really perfect segue from McLaren because I think
Well, before you
it's
jump onto that, I just want to say we've one final fun fact for sort of the Mercedes aspect was Lewis has been winning in F1 for so long that this weekend's F3 winner, Arvid Lindblad, hadn't been born when Lewis first won an F1 race. We were 2 months away from Arvid's birth. And meanwhile, Kimi Antonelli wasn't even a year old at that point. So this is a man whose career spans like the lifespan of existing F3 and F2 drivers, and he's still able to extract that performance. And you look at other sports people and you look at the range across which they can perform, and then you look at what Lewis is able to do across that same time zone, you go, actually being able to stay at that level of performance for so long is genuinely very impressive.
Well, it's also sort of worth speaking or talking about how even Hamilton doubted himself on whether he still even had it, whether he had it in to perform. And it's like, even if you're at sort of the pinnacle of your sport, every driver is still a human being at the end of the day. And it's, they still have the same kind of doubts and thoughts as us sort of regular people.
There's a very eloquent interview from his dad at one point. I can't remember if it was with Sky or who it was with, or if it was F1 TV, but he really spoke about sort of building the mental side of Lewis, or trying to, or sort of Lewis's ability
I think that was
keep
with Lee
that
McKenzie
going.
for Channel 4.
It was genuinely a really good interview, and I'd recommend going and sort of digging it out if you want to watch it, because it is absolutely spot on. We'll move then, as we've been trying to do, to McLaren before this becomes too Mercedes heavy. And Thiemo, you said your Channel 4 interview with Piastri post-race sums it up. What was the detail from that one that stood out then?
For me, it was just it was the freshness of the start of the interview with the question of Steve Jones. He just calls it how it is, and he just essentially said something along the lines of Piastri. He just went, "So McLaren basically they screwed you over today, didn't they?" And Piastri just goes, "Oh, you really call it how it is, don't you?" Kind of like not denying, but answering it in a very very professional kind of way. It was like very much did, and it was a shame because again, it's Piastri and another race where there could have been more on the table for him. And going back to the connection I was saying with Mercedes, was a perfect segue in there with Hamilton's being the difference maker before I get back to Piastri, is the fact that you know that he will get the job done. And I think it's hopefully long term, this is good for Norris, this absolute baptism of fire that he's being put through at the moment where, yeah, you're a good driver. Yeah, you're in possibly the quickest car on the grid. But that doesn't mean jack diddly if you can't actually deliver with it on race day, and you've still got to beat the likes of Lewis Hamilton, who, yeah, the man's doubting himself. He's been on this rough patch for so long. He only knows how to win. And he has to go through this difficult period. And you've got Max Verstappen, who hasn't been challenged properly since early 2022. And you think he's going to just let it go past, and you think, no, I'm quite glad that you're having to go through all of this and that you're being put under the pressure, because it should make you the driver that you think you are, not the driver that you actually are at the moment, which is a driver who, I mean, DC called it post-race. He's saying that Norris is criticising the team a bit, but he kind of bungled himself in a lot of ways. He had all the information available to him, and maybe the team should have overruled him on the tyres, for example, but he chose the tyres to go on. He bungled the pit stop when he skidded into it. He messed it up at the crucial time again. And ultimately, all of the strategy they've been doing all race long, including sacrificing Piastri, was for nothing because you didn't get the win and you didn't even get the second place. And you look at the time they would have lost if they double stacked Piastri instead of keeping him out. And it's kind of like 7 seconds, I think Piastri was saying, if he'd gone in at the same time, just having to wait behind versus like the 18-second difference on track. And it's just mad that they thought that was going to work for them and that it was an acceptable risk for Oscar. And it shows his professionalism, but you think, how much more of that does he put up with before he started getting his elbows out a bit more? And kind of, yeah, Norris's post-race reaction, I think that was on with Napoli on Sky. He just seemed so Stroll-like. He just like always of just being so uninterested in everything. It was like, oh, it didn't go my way, I didn't do all of this and that, and kind of lauding it and going, oh, I should have done this and I should have done that, and it's like, and all the team let us down. It was like, you are a critical part of that team, and you're not talking in the way that you'd see Lewis do in that situation, or Max, or someone else even. And I think to bring it full circle, the cool down run was the most amusing bit for me, because Hamilton Verstappen basically tore apart his and McLaren strategy in 2 seconds and just pointed out, yeah, this is why you lost. You had all of this available to you, and this is the option you chose. Yeah, no wonder you're sitting in P3 looking a bit unhappy with yourself, which is very funny and brilliantly shows the difference between then the actual championship winners and repeat Grand Prix winners, and the guy that, oh, I should have won that race. We're like, well, then just do it.
Mm. I think there's certainly something that sort of bugs me a bit off the McLaren strategy, and certainly as we mentioned, that point where they were coming into double stack. While it's great having your cars running in sort of flying formation around the circuit with incredible pace, when those moments occur, you need to know exactly what you're going to do. And almost it would have been more sensible to have pitted Piastri possibly a lap earlier, or just bit the bullet and done the double stack, because Oscar had essentially a pit stop over Lando, and Lando made it up in a lap because Oscar had no way of keeping the pace in the wet on slicks, basically, at that point. Lando's pit box overshoot certainly didn't help matters either when they came in to stop at another point in time. So a weekend that has a lot to be learnt for the Woking outfit, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you look at the numbers, actually, Oscar's waiting time with a double stack would have been closer to about 3 seconds. So McLaren definitely dropped the ball there. It was the wrong choice, and that's what lost them.
I kind of have the same sentiments. Like, you know how I love talking about race strategies and tires, but not like this. I mean, you know, the one with double stacking, you know, by the time Oscar pitted, Lando was like 3 seconds behind him. It's just, I don't know.
It shows that there's still a team rebuilding, in the sense that Mercedes and Ferrari, even to an extent, and Red Bull wouldn't make this kind of mistake because they know what it takes to do all of this. Where it's been so long for McLaren that they're still having to find their way, and so much has changed within that team that they're still trying to build up these elements of it. And going back to what I say, you can have the fastest car, but that doesn't mean that you're entitled to the win. You still need to nail everything else, and these little cracks are what's going to potentially cost you in the long term. And they're lucky in some ways that Perez is doing what he's doing at the moment, because if they win the Constructors' Championship, you wonder how much of that is down to them working or just Red Bull being compromised.
Well, it's whenever they're sort of near to sort of having a win, they just panic. It's like I kind of said last week how they should have maybe risked it and tried pitting a lap earlier. Obviously, they wouldn't have known this until sort of hindsight that Max had his pit stop was slow, but you know, they had new mediums. I don't know why they didn't stick to that. Why were they looking at Hamilton and thinking, oh, well, he's on used softs, why don't we do that? Because I don't think that was even an option in their heads. Even when they sort of asked Oscar that kind of question, Oscar was like, no, it's new mediums. Like, that's the
So he was just like, yeah, mediums, obvious straight away, just so quick, and just like, what else is it going to be? Come on.
I don't think the drivers should be making that call either. It's up to the strategists. The strategists have the data.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the interesting thing, because you look at Mercedes, and they were saying about bringing Inters on for Lewis a bit earlier, and there was some tire, I can't remember if it was Inters or what, but it was kind of like that shows where the driver knows more than the data shows you. But there's that trust, there's experience, there's this kind of, I know when to listen to the driver, I know when to listen to the data. They've got that worked out, whereas McLaren, they nailed it with Oscar, but at the wrong moment, and then they bungled it with Norris. And it shows that they've got all the pieces, they just haven't put them in the right places yet, and that's what compromising these situations when they get into the position where it actually matters, and then it gets fumbled.
One team, weirdly, that didn't seem to compromise things this weekend, though, was Aston Martin. A bit of a quiet race with them, didn't see much of them on the coverage, but I won't say they're back, but I mean, double points for them.
They had a solid race. They can at least end the triple header on a high. The other two weren't that great, but this is actually only the 4th time both drivers have finished within the points. And besides Imola, they are the only places where Lance Stroll has also scored points too.
Yeah, you're just looking at all the drivers with the contract extensions going, but why?
Well, Stroll.
Well, we know why, but
no one was surprised by that signing.
No.
But yeah, it's positive for them, but there's not really much else to say about them. It's just kind of, I think it goes back to what I keep saying about Alonso from how he acted in Bahrain. They know they've got a car that isn't all there, and they'll know that at some races they'll do better than others, so they've got to maximize it and keep their heads down, and other ones they'll just kind of get out of the way of anyone behind them and they'll do their thing. And this one was kind of like, we can do well here, but we just need to try and keep out of everyone's way, but not everyone's in the normal sense of us finishing down in P15, P16 sort of area. We can get some points here, and just that is how they're weirdly being able to stay at the top of that midfield at the moment.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think if they're able to sort of carry on this sort of pace and pressure, if they're going to be able to add to that already exciting mid pack once again, it's going to continue to be a very interesting season. But we talk about the mid pack, we might as well talk about Minardi, RB, Toro Rosso, call them what you may. They bagged point this weekend.
Yeah, I'm going to let all of you three go first because I might be a while here, so go for it.
I mean, they're ultimately not where they want to be, really, are they? I mean, obviously, UK did end up in the points or getting a point, but they did also get overtaken by Albon at the tail end of the race. So I'd assume
pace.
Where they want to be, yes. Leading up to the race, obviously the team were working on Ricciardo's car as it had an issue, and I don't know whether that affected his race at all or not.
I mean, Andy, maybe you'll be happier to help on this one, but it probably didn't help things that he was having those issues at the very least.
No, and I'll be the first to admit that we definitely do not have the fastest car on pace. One thing we have continuously struggled with before these new regulations, we've struggled with over the years, is we seem to not be able to develop a car that performs in low to mid-speed cornering. The result of that is we're very easy to outbrake and we understeer like an absolute pig. So it really hurt Ricciardo's race. Compound that with a few other issues, and yeah, you're not going to get a result that's sort of great for everyone. What's more is there were a lot of staff in the grandstands watching on Sunday, and I think a few of us were a little bit butthurt about watching our car sort of slowly fall down the order. Happy for Yuki, obviously. Any point is good, but concerned with the rate at which Haas are closing in on us, because that gap down to only 4 points, incredibly scary. We just have a lot of work to do, and hopefully Belgium and the latter half of the season after the summer break can bring sort of a new hope for us. Our sort of stagnation of points at the moment is not ideal. We had a great start to the year, but we just haven't seemed to be able to keep up that rate of development at this point. So it's frustrating, but it's something that I promise you, we are all working really hard on. I mean, I was at work today. I was in the wind tunnel at sort of 5 o'clock this morning, up until this afternoon. We are all working around the clock to try and improve that car every single day. So it's something that will come with time, but we really showed our true weakness at Silverstone, and that was in sort of the middle sector, the final sector of the circuit as well. And it really, really bit us. So we're still recovering from that, but hopefully looking upwards.
Do you think some of, obviously half of it was a wet race as well, that sort of hid some of the lack of performance as well? Do you think it could have been worse?
I think our car has always been quite good in the wet, being that it is less reliant, or sort of say it's less susceptible to setup changes, wet to dry. We seem to normally benefit in a wet session, but we just couldn't really get a grip on it this race. Part of that was probably down to tyre strategy. There was a point at which Daniel looked like he wasn't comfortable in the car. He was certainly very squirmy and sort of stabby on throttle and with the steering, and that was evident when the car sort of lacked a bit of rear end grip and a bit of rear end confidence, especially under power. But that's a known issue and something that we need to possibly address as a setup issue further down the line.
I meant more like because it was a wet race, you had sort of maybe a bit better performance than if it was going to be a dry one, or
maybe for Daniel. I was expecting him lower down the order. Yuki certainly should have been further up in the points. His lack of pace to the Haas and the Williams was not what we expected at all.
Is the pace against the Haas something that sort of is going to be sort of swings and roundabouts through the season? Is it going to be something that we see sort of come and go as the Haas develops as well as yours, or is this something that's just inherent in the Haas, that it is just an inherently sort of faster design, certainly at certain circuits?
I don't know. I think Haas have really accelerated development over the last 3 or 4 months, and they are making amazing strides. So hats to them. One or two people who work there, and they're very, very good friends of mine. So I have passed on my congratulations for this weekend as well. But they're doing an incredible job, and it's something that we can't seem to keep up with. So
yeah. Interestingly, Liam Lawson is testing the RB in a Pirelli tyre test coming up soon. So that might also shake things up and pile on a bit of pressure for certain unsigned drivers. So crucially Daniel Ricciardo, but also maybe Perez. And I mean, Daniel Ricciardo came into the weekend heralding that he needed to do something spectacular at Silverstone to potentially look at a seat for next year. But P13 isn't exactly that something spectacular. But yeah, point for Yuki, quiet race for him overall. But Thiemo, I know you opened this section with something to say.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously it wasn't a straightforward race for Ricciardo, as we mentioned, with the issues and a few of the little bits and pieces. But I think it's worth diving a little bit deeper down into the whole thing, kind of as we were alluding to when we were talking about Red Bull earlier, because since Canada, Ricciardo scored 6 points versus Yuki's single point in Silverstone, and he's finished higher than Yuki in 3 of the last 4 races. You look at qualifying, and it's pretty neck and neck. Monaco P12 for P8, Canada P5 P8, Spain P18 for P17, Austria P11 P14, and then Silverstone P15 P13. You bring Perez then into that, who's done P16, P16, P8, P8, and P19, and it again shows why this is all getting quite interesting on what do we do with the drivers in these seats at the moment. You look at the Grand Prix then, P12 for P8 in Monaco. Obviously, not much is going to happen there. But then Canada P8 for Ricciardo versus Yuki's P14, Spain P15 v P19, Austria P9 for P14, and then Silverstone P13 versus P10. And it's just not as black and white as it can come across sometimes. And I mean, 11 points to Perez since Monaco, v Ricciardo 6, v Yuki's 5, 4 of which for Yuki were in Monaco. And they're both doing that in a car that's not meant to be anywhere near that Red Bull, probably. And so while it may not have been Ricciardo's weekend, there were the car issues. And when you compare him to Perez and Yuki, his main rivals for that Red Bull seat in teams that they've both been bedded into for quite a while now, whereas he obviously hasn't been, it's not anywhere near as bad as many would want you to believe, I don't think. And Perez doesn't improve and things at RB continue as they are, then I think to fulfill certain, not necessarily promises, but promises is the word I'm going to use, you put Ricciardo in that Red Bull either sometime this year or next year with an eye for Yuki for 26, and you stick Lawson as teammate at RB for next year, and then you can finally kind of put all of those kind of, what's the phrase, not cats to rest, but whichever animal it is you're putting to rest there, and you see what's what, and you can potentially see who the better driver is to go next to Verstappen. Because like you were saying earlier, Andy, Verstappen is a beast, and you're not expecting any of them to get in that car next to them suddenly be beating him, but you kind of want that Perez from 2021 being that perfect rear gunner and being the driver to pick up the wins and the podiums when he's not able to do so for whatever reason. And I think even though Ricciardo's had a bit of a not as good a season as we'd want to, it's proof that you have such quick turnarounds, especially in a triple header, that you have an issue maybe from Spain that you might not be on top of yet because you're just so busy focusing on Austria and so many other things. Then you've got to deal with Silverstone that by the time you get to Hungary and Spa, you still might not have solved everything because it's still not that long a period of time to deal with all of this. So the fact that even with all those issues and everything, he's still not a million miles away in terms of pace and overall performance I think he's doing a pretty good job considering.
If I should remain impartial to this regarding, but I would love to see Lawson in that seat next year. Personally,
He deserves a shot.
I think Lawson for us in 25 with a view to moving him into the Red Bull seat for 26 is a perfectly valid option. What then happens to Perez, I don't know, or Ricardo, I can't say. I'd like us to hold on to Yuki.
This is what I'm saying. You fulfill your obligation as such to Ricardo. You stick him in the Red Bull for a season because we don't know what the 26 regulations are going to do and how much havoc they're going to play. You've still got the consistency with Yuki then, and for a season next year that if it keeps developing at the rate it does, could be quite tasty. And you want someone who knows the team and car that well to help you bring it through. And Lawson, it's great for him to prove himself. And Ricardo said before he doesn't want a handout. So if he goes up to that Red Bull to replace Perez and he's not cut out for it, he'll happily bow out at the end of 25 and go and do something else. But you know at least that everyone's been given a fair shot at something, and you know you've got two very strong drivers in Yuki and Lawson who could go up to the Red Bull in 26 then.
Absolutely. I mean, Yuki is part of the furniture now. He's a
very small bit
ingrained in our team, and it's wonderful that we are carrying on with him.
We'll move on then from RB, Toro Rosso, to Williams. And I think this was a bit of an underrated performance across the board from them. Obviously, points for Albon and Sargent P11, which not too shabby at all, especially given changing conditions. We know he's not the strongest driver on the grid, but still to be able to keep it on the track and up that end of the field through all of that isn't too bad, especially when you consider P12 in quali, proving it wasn't just the chaos ahead that opened the door for him. Maybe the pressure of being dropped mid-season was the push he needed, and he does now also leap Bottas into 20th place of the drivers' standings. So we'll see what happens with them.
I agree. I think with all that went on, it was easy to forget that Williams did really have a good weekend. You know, Logan into Q2, Albon into Q3. You know, bit of contact at the start of the race for Alex, but it didn't seem to damage the car too badly. So he was able to fight his way back up into the points. And I think this is Logan's best race finish this year.
Yeah.
And both of them got their race finishing positions through merit rather than any luck.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because Albon, and sorry, Andy, for doing this, but he got past Yuki. He was already in the points for P10, but he got past him for P9 to, like you say, did it on merit. And it's not one of these. I mean, it's kind of half the time when you're in these teams and these cars where you've got to be in the right place at the right time. A little bit like Russell last week. You know you're not going to necessarily win, but if something happens, you want to capitalize on it. So Yuki, he wouldn't have got that point if Russell had kept going. Whereas Albon, he was going to get at least 1 point because he was just there this weekend. And like you say, with everything else going on, it's the unfortunate thing of they actually did pretty well when you look at it. And Sargent as well, we don't say this very often, but he did a very good job considering. So it's nice that we've got a little bit of positivity for them. And maybe I was a bit ambitious predicting P5 for Albon last week, but I'll take the P9.
However, we ought to have a quick look at stake. And
is that it?
It's going to be a quick look, let's face it. I was quite surprised at how long it took Zhou to unlap himself from a retired George Russell. I know it was possibly 2 laps down, but even then it was a slow old time for him to come back around those multiple laps.
But even with Perez as well, it took him about the same time as Zhou as well. But yeah, with so much going on at the front, you also hardly saw what was happening at the back. So Stake really had no chance of any spotlight if anything good did even happen. All I can really say is that
there was no risk of that.
that Zhou suffered from a less than ideal strategy, obviously starting on the soft, which degraded too quickly, so had to pit for mediums before the rain came in. So he was already a pit stop behind them when he needed to pit for inters literally a few laps later. But they lacked overall pace regardless. But the social media team seemed to be hard at work.
Yeah, I mean, they'd come from a Zero Petroleum press release at Bicester Heritage a few days before with Paddy Lowe essentially forming a new artificial petrol, which is quite interesting. But they've been down there with Damon Hill and showing off bits and pieces. I think Zero Petroleum is now sponsor alongside on the car somewhere. So it's, yeah, they'd had the best run up to the weekend, and they just seemed a bit drivers disinterested in it, really.
Still like the livery though.
Still a good looking car, nice and bright, easy to make out through the gloom and rain of Silverstone. Then it comes to Haas, and this is another weekend where we're quite excited to have Haas in the field.
It's just tremendous. I mean, Hulkenberg's first back-to-back top 6 finish since 2018, the US and Mexican Grand Prix when he was with Renault, for Christ's sake. And Haas's first consecutive top 6 finish also since 2018 in France and Austria, respectively. And now, because of the strength of his performance, Hulkenberg is 1 point away from Stroll and breaking into the top 10 of the Drivers' Championship. And he scored more points in the last 6 races than Perez. What on earth?
Yeah, you've got to hope that Stake/Audi/Sauber have a really good car next year to go along.
You really do.
Or rather, you've got to hope that they've got a very good contract with Hulkenberg. Because if you're at Red Bull, surely you're looking at Hulkenberg going, could we drop him in for Perez for half the season?
He's the one kind of annoying pin that could be dropped into this whole equation that ruins all of my plans, and I wouldn't even be mad.
I'm going to second that. I would love to see Hulkenberg in the Red Bull seat. It's such a rogue move.
He's kind of the next Perez in a way, isn't he? He's this driver that's been around for a long time, never got quite the opportunity that he deserved, and then the top team comes in the twilight of his career and goes, you know what, go for it, son. And he gets a couple of seasons in there. But unlike Perez, he leaves well before he starts dropping off again. Like, I've taken some wins. I was never expecting that in the first place. I'm out of here while I can still do this, and I can leave with my head held high.
He's always been the almost guy. Almost went to Mercedes, and instead it was Lewis Hamilton. That still pains me. But
he's like Alonso in that respect. He's just kind of, it's not quite that bad luck, but it's not far off.
No, exactly.
And the last team on our list is, of course, Alpine, and a load of new parts, and immediately the gearbox shits itself on Gasly's car.
What moment do you think I realised I still had Gasly in my fantasy F1 team?
Right at the moment he pulled back into the pit lane. I do not have the patience to be an Alpine fan. I could not do it.
I think I have Gasly in the greatest mustache.
Because that team's doing so well anyway without him.
It's doing tremendously well.
Is this the Flavio effect? Is he back now and just causing chaos again?
One race weekend, it seemed like he was causing sort of excitement and bringing the team forwards, and then all of a sudden, everyth's made out of cheese and it's all gone to piss.
Yeah,
he's taken a pill that's meant to improve the performance, and it's gone a bit early.
They scared out into a few good results, and now they've just scared Alpine, and the car's gone.
They've gone back to normal. Yeah.
Back to our regularly scheduled programming for the French.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not the worst situation the French have been in recently, but we won't delve.
Yeah, but it feels like they're competing against themselves a lot at the moment, and not in the way that we'd want them to be doing. It's like no, they're meant to be going up, not down.
No. Anyway, we'll move into then our little wrap up of the Grand Prix then with our winners and spinners. And as you're the guest, we'll be nice. We'll let you start. Andy, your winner from the weekend.
I think I have to say standout. He made the most of the home crowd atmosphere. I'm not a diehard fan, as I've already said, but my standout star of the weekend has to be home winner Lewis Hamilton. What an unbelievable fairy tale performance! I don't think you could have topped it.
Was sublime.
I'm agreeing with you because I've just written who else. You know, like it's got to be. I mean, I can see who else from the notes, but I mean, fair enough. And if it was going to be Logan Sargent, it's going to be Lewis Hamilton. So you know, it's just kind of like we said before. You couldn't have written it better if you tried.
For me, I sort of echo it similarly. For me, it's Mercedes. It's seeing the team sort of reformed, restructured, and re-energized to go again. And I've never been a big
even with
Mercedes
George, you
fan.
can't be mad because he did everything right, and it was just a mechanical thing that could have happened to anyone. So it's kind of like that you can be perfect and that will still happen. So you can't even fault them for a DNF, which is the best way to not be able to fault someone, it feels like.
Yeah, the pole qualifying and sort of the opening stint of the race, he was doing well, and the team, the energy you're getting from this Mercedes team that's just sort of kicked itself back into motion is intoxicating, and I really like it. I think it is a great sign of the health of the sport and where it is at the moment.
I went for a different team and driver. I went for Nico Hulkenberg because it was just another almighty drive of him, and I thought it was about time that I make him my winner.
Fair enough. When it comes to the other side of that coin, though, our spinners, Andy, I'll let you go again.
I think somebody or a team who showed that they still can crack under pressure and they're still sort of finding their footing at the top. It's got to be McLaren. They fumbled what was their race to lose, and proved to us that they are still definitely on a very steep learning curve and on a sort of path of recovery.
I went for the same. Either driver could have won that race, and for one reason or another, neither did.
Yeah.
It's again the amusing thing of they should have listened to one driver and not the other, and they somehow got the 50-50 wrong.
Meanwhile, I went for Perez as my spinner. I think just a driver that left too much on the table. And again, those costly mistakes in qualifying were exactly that, costly. And maybe if he had started further up the grid, he might have been able to make a different strategy work and been able to play something more than just a sort of tyre experiment that Verstappen needed. So I'm hoping things pick up for him. But at the same time, if I get to see him have an almighty shunt while I'm in Hungary, the excitement could be interesting if he's able to cause something.
Gone for Charles Leclerc though, because it seems a little unfair in some respects. It came in too soon, and off the back of his poor qualifying, it all just kind of compounded from there. But the reason I've chosen him, and to an extent Ferrari as well, is just because they should know by now, especially with him. Like you wouldn't forgive it if it was with Sainz, but you'd maybe understand a little more. Whereas Charles, it's like you've been there for so long now, you should have this kind of stuff nailed in. And again, we were saying about Norris and McLaren, how they cocked that up, and it's kind of, you look at Lewis and Mercedes, how they got that just right, and you'd think if you had to put Leclerc and Ferrari in one of those categories, you'd stick him with Lewis and Mercedes, because that would be that makes more sense, because he's been there for so long. They've got the relationship, they know they're not going anywhere. It's that kind of thing, and they're more used to winning in some respects than McLaren have been in recent years. So it's just another fumble, and you just think, why? I don't think he would have won the race, but you need more. You could have done what Sainz did and get fifth and fastest lap.
We'll see if they're able to turn that around going into the next sort of half of the season, interestingly. Predictions review, 0 points for pole position predictions this week. Thiemo gets 1 point for a Hamilton win, and I got a point for Norris P3. Meanwhile, Thiemo finally, as we've mentioned, picks up that point for a Sainz fastest lap, and there were no points for wild predictions. On the other side,
creeping towards double points. Creeping towards.
Where does that put you now overall? Race by race predictions, your score puts you on 5. So yeah, creeping is
about right.
Yeah, yeah.
The gap between us.
You're on 19, I'm on 13, the guest is on 10, and Thiemo is on 5. So yeah.
Well, then I'm fine, because I didn't actually make any predictions this race. Thiemo did them on my behalf.
Yeah, and even then he still wasn't able to completely hobble you. Meanwhile, when it comes to our fantasy league for the British Grand Prix, ARG came out on top with 227 points, Trabant Formula 1 team 220, and F1 team Forte 187. When it comes to our teams, Justica para Carlos came P8, my podcast team P18, on the Kerbs P20, and Full Send the Pit P37. Overall, Take a Stroll still leads 2,555 points. What's the Racing Point 2,533, and Doors by Gunther Steiner 2,453 points. When it's our teams, JB Racing in P10, on the Kerbs P16, Ellie-May's Pod Team P19, and the Greatest Moustache down in P37, which rather nicely.
It was a bad time to change drivers from Fernando Alonso to George Russell.
Yeah. this was not that weekend to do it.
A friend of mine did that with Lando Norris last week. They changed from whoever it was to Lando for Austria, and then yeah, any other race.
Any other race. Anyway, that brings us to a nice conclusion for this week's episode. And before we sort of wrap up, if you listen to our preview episode, you'll know that we often give a shout out to sort of unique locations that actually happen to listen to us. And we got a response from one of the places.
I didn't want to do this in the preview because I didn't get this wrong. I wanted you to apologise for this.
Yeah, I got this one wrong. I got the pronunciation of, and I'm going to have to really focus on getting this correct. Okotoks, yeah, I believe that is more correct, which is just south of Calgary in Canada. Thank you to Nathaniel who lives there and pointed that out. So thank you for listening and thanks for correcting my pronunciation. It's appreciated, and thank you to all our other Canadian listeners. It's lovely to have you. Anyway, we'll have another weird location to pinpoint in our preview for the Hungarian Grand Prix. Andy, in the meantime, where can the people find you?
Well, right now I'm in my upstairs office at home. No, I'm on any social media at Andy Boulay, all the same handle. Or you can find me loitering around the paddocks of Great Britain as I sort of make my way around different race events.
Lovely stuff. Ellie-May, where can the people find you?
I will hopefully be at Goodwood this week. This household is currently quite ill. I'm on anti-sickness tablets. Dad's got COVID. Mum's been throwing up. So we might make
Hospital
it.
then.
Yeah. We might make it, we might not.
You have to go to Goodwood to find out.
Well,
You
exactly.
got a plug for Goodwood because they need the advertising.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not sold out till.
Yeah, I'll give them one in a second as well. Thiemo, where can the people find you? What have you been up to?
I'm going to plug Is It Fast this week because once again I will have another interview out with the fourth and final driver I think I'm talking to this week from the Rally Jamil that was held in Saudi Arabia a few months back. I've done a bit of a mini project on there. There's 3 interviews out at the moment with drivers from here, there and everywhere along with an explainer article, and the next one is coming out this week sometime, so do go and check that out.
And in the meantime, if you want more from me, you can, of course, find me writing for Classic Car Weekly. You'll be able to pick up the last of our sort of summer bumper issues, or you can wait and pick up the next one, which has a head-to-head between the first Volkswagen Golf and the last of the Volkswagen Beetles to see just how revolutionary the shift was. If you want more from me on social media, I'm at Jesse on Cars on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And I'll likely also be in the workshop at some point, hopefully finally finishing reassembling my MG Midget, which is so close to being done. So close.
Have to finish. I left you with a very thorough to-do list. So
It's nearly there. It's just trying to find the time. So I'm also at Goodwood this weekend, so I don't really have much space to sort of fit it into, but it will get done. It will be up and
Most
running.
I appreciate your work and help for him, Andy. I'm so looking forward to the first time he's got it finished. He takes it out and it just dies immediately.
well, no, because that will be on me. Let's
Yeah,
hope
But that means that means I've got more respect for you because you've done all this and you've pranked him proper good.
Immediately drives it back into a puddle
river.
too big for the midget.
He'll turn to his girlfriend and go, "Watch this," and it'll go spectacularly wrong.
No, I've learned my lesson. No more fording
No, you
rivers in
haven't.
low-slung sports cars. Anyway, that's all we've got for this extended review of the British Grand Prix. We'll be back in due course with a preview of the Hungarian Grand Prix. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.